Practice makes perfect. It's a saying told to children, meant to encourage and teach them that with hard work and determination, they can be on equal footing with the heroes they admire. Unfortunately, that isn't always true. There are some born without the ability to do this, no matter how much work they put in, and there are some born already possessing this ability without having to work for it at all. Rumors amongst townfolk say that Keiran was actually born a half-elf, and that's why he's able to wield a longbow better than most adults by the age of 9. Others conspire that Keiran has some sort of secret tool or trick that allows him to accurately shoot targets at ranges even the highest-ranking bowmen of the military can't achieve. There are even people who claim that he has never missed a shot because he's blessed by some god or goddess of archery. No matter where Keiran went, it seemed that rumors and gossip loved to follow him. Ever since he was a little boy, he's been the subject of ridicule and hatred by the adults around him, just for being better at something than they were. It's not like he asked for this ability. He's never really had much of an interest in archery anyways. He waited with bated breath at the opportunity to leave home as soon as he was old enough and find a different passion, one that made him truly happy and excited to live. But when he was conscripted to join the military at the age of 15, it seemed as though he would never get that chance. Many would think that a guild of warriors so tight-knit as the military would relish in the opportunity to foster skilled youth into proud and mighty warriors meant to lead future generations into vainglorious victory for honor and country. They would, of course, be wrong. To Keiran, it seemed like they were worse than anyone he had met before. Gods above, do we really need soldiers so badly we're letting babies fight with us now? One man said as Keiran walked past him in the barracks.
Hey, listen, boss, I ain't changing his diaper when he wets himself on the battlefield. I don't care how much you pay me,
said another, talking to the man in front of Keiran. Compared to Kieran's slender, immature stature, this man looked like a brick wall. No, an entire building. For every large, powerful stomp of a step the man took, Keiran had to take 2 or 3 just to keep up. The great sword he held on his hip looked as if it was taller than Keiran, and by the looks of it, he could probably wield it with one hand as if it were a dagger. His armor was pristine. It stood out like a diamond amongst charcoal, a polished obsidian plate mail amongst dull, dented, and dirty pieces of metal. To any fighter, this man would be very intimidating, yet Keiran hardly noticed and just continued walking behind him, taking note of each and every person who felt the need to shout at him. As the unlikely pair finished their silent tour of the barracks, Keiran was led into a separate, smaller office. The desk in the center was humble, a simple wooden construction without flair or adornment, but the same could not be said about the rest of the room. Ornamental helmets and shields, medals, plaques on shelves, weapons the size of Keiran, and many full bookshelves of history covered the walls. In one corner, like charcoal amongst diamonds, sat a simple set of dull, dirty, dented steel. The kind of armor that tells stories without saying a single word. One that had clearly seen things beyond Kieran's imagination. After shutting the door behind him, the man walked to his desk, took his sword off his hip, placed it onto the desk, and sighed.
Sorry about all the decorations. I have nowhere else to put it all,
he said quietly, gesturing to the room around him.
Feels like it should be someone else's most of the time. Not my style, if that makes any sense.
As the giant man began taking off plate after plate of heavy armor, Keiran began studying. The man had what could only be described as an unsure look on his face. For a moment, Keiran could see remorse flicker in his eyes, and then, as quickly as it arrived, it faded into familiar apathy.
You know, I've heard quite a few things about you, Keiran. You seem to be a talented young fellow,
the man said. Keiran stayed quiet, deciding to choose his words very carefully.
I should probably introduce myself before we go any further. My name is Commander Black. I joined the military almost at the same age as you. Very similar. Actually, now that I think about it, it wasn't my choice either. Apparently they see me fit to take command of all these people, and so I do my best. If you give me a chance, I'll do right by you.
Keiran found Commander Black interesting. He could tell by the way the commander discussed his honors that he didn't care much for glory.
I have a question for you, Keiran. Do you enjoy archery?
Keiran was dumbfounded by the question. He didn't expect the commander to immediately ask a question that he didn't have an answer to. Answered Keiran. Well, I don't dislike it.
I thought so. Don't worry. I didn't expect you to like it. When you're as good as you are, the challenge disappears. And within that challenge lies the fun.
I guess that makes sense. The commander turned to face Keiran and bent down to meet his gaze.
Tell me, Keiran, would you like a challenge?
Yes, sir.
Ha ha! I knew it. Follow me, boy.
Commander Black shouted, shaking Kieran's minuscule hand in his own. And so the two departed, out into the training ground of this installment. Well, if you could call them training grounds, that is. For the most part, it was just a sectioned off piece of woods. Thick lines of trees with deep scars from blades or arrows impacting their flesh. Keiran stood alone, an unfamiliar quiver and an unfamiliar bow on his back, and he took a deep breath. As per Commander Black's instructions, all he had to do was make it to the other side of the woods without being caught. The commander had removed his armor so as to make the task a little bit easier, and has even given Keiran express permission to treat him as an enemy and fire at will. Keiran had been hunting many times before. He had tracked deer through the woods and snuck up on them without so much as a hint of being detected. In his head, Keiran mocked the idea of a task this simple even being a challenge. Keiran centered himself, took a deep breath, and started off into the course. He moved silently, like an owl in the night. He climbed up a tree with relative ease and began jumping from branch to branch. He seemed to almost glide from tree to tree, his cloak keeping his landings quiet. In the distance, in a small clearing not much larger than him, stood Commander Black. He seemed to just be simply standing there, not doing much, not actively looking for Keiran, just standing. Keiran took the bow off his shoulder and began a process he had done a million times. All sound seemed to silence. The only noise to be heard was the sharp inhale of breath as Keiran pulled the bowstring taut. The power to kill lingered in the tension on his fingertips, waiting for a target to be chosen. Keiran aimed at Commander Black's leg, hoping to wound him so he could easily pass by. A target not unlike the many thousand he shot before. Accounting for the wind seemed almost as simple as taking a breath. Keiran released his fingers, letting the arrow fly. Without needing to look, he knew the arrow had hit his target. But as the arrow flew straight and true, Commander Black moved with a quickness uncharacteristic for his size. His 7-foot stature dashed and dodged the arrow, leaving it to land in the dirt. Frustrated, Keiran drew back another arrow quicker. A breath in as he pulled back the bowstring, choosing his target, adjusting for wind, and release. Another arrow launched into the air. Surely this one will land on its target. And yet, without breaking a sweat, Commander Black once again dashed and dodged out of the way of the arrow. This only served to anger Keiran even more. He pulled back another arrow, his breath no longer calm, but instead short and uneven. The power to kill sat within the tension on his fingertips, but this time, the target was different. Keiran was going for the head. He was shooting no longer to injure, but instead to kill. He let loose the arrow, aiming directly at the commander's head. He forgot to adjust for wind. The arrow whizzed by the commander's head, inches away from ending his life. Keiran realized what he had almost just done. His mind went numb. Keiran had never killed a man. He had never even considered it. Looking down, his hands were shaking. The bow dropped from his hands, and he watched in slow motion as it fell to the floor. The edges of his vision began to blur. All color began to fade into gray. Kieran's body swayed with the wind, but his mind remained motionless. Sometime later, a large hand placed on his shoulder shook him out of the trance. Color slowly began to come back, and as his vision sharpened and came into focus, the first noise he could hear was the sound of his own breath before he heard.
You're okay. Don't worry. It happened to me too. Everyone here has gone through what you're going through. It's not something you think about until it happens.
There was a long pause as Keiran focused on his own breath to attempt to calm himself down.
There's more to this job than just being skilled with a bow or blade, Keiran. There's discipline, leadership, and some really terrifying parts as well.
Another long pause. Keiran choosing to stay quiet. Or maybe he's just interested in what the commander will say next.
I can teach you to handle it all, if you're up for the challenge.
The commander said, a wide, dopey grin reaching across his face. Yeah, I think I would like that. And by the way, my friends, call me Kip.